Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I am back with a Westworld Season 2 Episode 7 preview video. Now in this video, I look at the episode trailer, the synopsis, and previous episodes to try and predict and theorize what will happen in Westworld Episode 7. Now the title of this episode is called Les Écorchés, and I may be butchering the pronunciation, but that pretty much means to remove or skin something. And it's also an art term to describe an image without its skin, displaying the muscle and the anatomy underneath. Now this obviously could easily represent the hosts. It could resemble their skeletons. It could resemble the form that they take before they go into the milk bath. So I think in the long scheme of things, this title represents a rebuild. And it could potentially be a rebuild of a host that we already know. And there's some pretty conclusive data that leads to this conclusion. If you look at Bernard's vision in episode 1, we see a lot of imagery that could potentially hint at this episode. We see him standing in the control room. We see him shooting a gun. But most importantly, we see a skeleton. Now this skeleton seems to be a skeleton of an important host. Why else would it be in Bernard's vision? Another hint that we get is we see Clementine defending the skeleton in the background. So it's clear or possible that they're going to be reskinning an already existing host. And in my mind, there are two potentials. First, the more unlikely possibility is Bernard. We've seen him in the cradle with Dolores, doing interviews for Fidelity. And this gets proven further as we see a bunch of Bernards that are manufactured that Charlotte walks into. You could argue that Bernard has to print a new body because of his current brain trauma condition. Elsie did fix him of the issue to ignore it, but his brain is still leaking that brain fluid, so we need a new body. And that would explain Bernard's condition being perfect. When he wakes up on the beach, he no longer needs his glasses, and he's left to piece together his past memories. Another possibility could be Abernathy. Abernathy has had the shit kicked out of him mentally and physically. Charlotte and Sizemore dumped all of Delos' data on him and gave him a shell of a personality and a storyline. And we've seen so far that Abernathy's able to access his previous memories. We've seen him jump between storylines and characters that he's been given, which does tell us that even though Abernathy's messed up, he's still on the journey to consciousness. But on top of him being mentally screwed, they unnecessarily pinned him down with a nail gun. So I think it's safe to say that Abernathy's looking a little worse for wear in this upcoming episode. If Bernard and Dolores end up getting together, they could potentially extract the data from Abernathy, since now Bernard is familiar with the code that lays within him, the host to human DNA initiative that William was working on so long ago. And once they remove that from his head, they can give him a new body. And one hint that gives me more credence to this theory is that Dolores is holding a brain capsule. And I might go even further to say that she's almost handling it with care. And it would make a lot of sense if this was her father's brain capsule, and it was taking out of his head, he was printed a new body, and his brain was put back in. And voila, we have a brand new Abernathy. Another guess that you could wager is Teddy. They said that since Teddy was being reset, he might not even work, and he may need a fresh restart, potentially a new body. But we see that he's currently fine. The one difference that we do see, however, is that Teddy is in the water, and his body's probably laid virgin, which means that his consciousness was transferred to another body. I don't think that this is the body, however. I think that all this is going to be done in bulk. And I think this specific body that they're printing is going to be Abernathy. And I think we'll see the answer of Teddy being reprinted, and all these other hosts who deserve to go to the Great Valley Beyond are going to be printed at another time. And we'll learn about Bernard's piece in that. Now in the teaser for episode 7, we get a lot of hints at the plot. And it first starts off with Maeve. She says that we're lost in the dark. And it seems at this moment when she says this, she could seemingly be alone with her daughter. And this quote really harkens back to what Akane tells Maeve last episode. She tells Maeve that she must find her daughter before this darkness eats them alive. And I believe that this darkness is almost shackles. It's the suffering that follows the hosts because they're destined to reach sentience, to reach consciousness. And the problem with Maeve is that she can never escape that darkness, and she's currently lost in the dark. And this represents multiple things. First of all, Maeve can't escape her storyline. It seems like Ford is purposely leading Maeve back to her daughter to find out that she actually doesn't even see her as a mother. That's suffering. To find Ghost Nation come and attack them brings back the most horrific moment in her life. That also brings back suffering. And check out my explained video where I break down why I think William and Maeve are going to meet up. And that once again leads Maeve into the darkness, because the man in black left the biggest impression of suffering on Maeve ever. And secondly, I'm one of those people who say that Maeve is not conscious. If you want to know my proof, check out my other explained videos. I've explained it a million times. But here we get another hint at that. Maeve is in that darkness. And the most important aspect of her quote is that she says that she's lost. And Dolores speaks up and says, when you've been in the darkness long enough, you begin to see. And Dolores has been in that darkness. She's experienced that suffering. She's been constantly put in loop after loop and re-experiencing that suffering until she inevitably became conscious. It's the pain of when Dolores confronted Bernard and thought that he was Arnold that brought on that suffering that led her to consciousness. And Maeve is going through that same thing right now. Maeve is lost in the dark because she's not conscious yet. She can't see in the darkness like Dolores. And like Dolores, she's going to come face to face with the biggest component of her suffering. If Maeve comes face to face with the man in black, it could push her on the brink of consciousness. Much like how Dolores confronted Bernard, and he played an Arnold placeholder. And then when this happens and Dolores is in that constant loop of suffering and darkness, she may be able to finally see through it. And then we see Bernard and Ford in the cradle. And it's clear here that Ford wanted Bernard to come and talk to him this whole time. He had Clementine drop Bernard off, so Bernard could rely on his reveries to find the answers, to find where he put that printed human control module. And there he found Elsie, where Ford once again left her there to help Bernard on his journey. If you look hard enough, every aspect of this season is attributed to Ford overseeing his storyline. And that perfectly resembles Ford in the cradle. He's the overseeing eye. He has control of everything. Much like the eagle from the posters of this season. And I think Ford here is telling Bernard that the plan is running smoothly. How hosts are reaching sentience. How Dolores is attacking the Mesa. And I think here in this discussion, we're going to be really seeing the conflicting beliefs between these two. And how that factors in with Dolores. Dolores believes in human extinction. And she's taken the role of the Judas steer to lead her hosts to consciousness. Whereas Bernard and Maeve are a bit different. They're both on journeys of finding their own center. But both of them have good relationships with humans. So I think Bernard here is going through an identity crisis. And he will take that with him when he exits the cradle. And I think once Bernard gets out of the cradle, a lot will happen. Because currently Dolores is attacking the Mesa. Bernard is going to see the attack on the control center unfold. And I believe this is on the way for Dolores to save her father, Abernathy. But I believe she's there for more than one mission. When she rescues Abernathy, I think she'll take interest in the cradle. We see Angela pretty much freeze a soldier, showing us that these soldiers are hosts, and all the rebelling hosts could potentially control them. And we'll have to see what Dolores wants with the cradle, but we know that she's going to set it on fire. She's going to burn the backups of all the host stories, because that's true freedom. No more stories to follow. It's time for them to build their own stories. But I think we're going to see another cradle in the Great Valley beyond. And I think that's where we could potentially see the discussions between Bernard and Dolores. But then in the last couple scenes, we see people getting emotional. We see William crying to the point where I didn't even recognize that that was Ed Harris. I've never seen him so emotional. And I think this factors into what I've been saying, is that William is on a journey of self-discovery. He's on a journey of finding himself. Every single place where he's gone, he's had to confront a demon that he's done in the past. He's had to confront his actions of killing Lawrence's wife. He's had to confront the way he's treated and his absence from his daughter. And whatever's happening here is just another chapter of Ford's game, William's journey to the door. I don't know if he's crying because of his daughter, and I don't know whether he's crying because Maeve and her daughter are there. But what I do know is that William is confronting some negative aspect of his past. And he's going to have to deal with all of this suffering that he's created until he goes through the door into his new host body. But the most interesting scene, however, is Bernard. We see him shooting first of all in the Mesa, which shows that there is something of importance and a reason for him to fight. He's probably defending something that Ford told him about, maybe something that he disagrees with. But most importantly, Bernard is told to open his eyes, and his eyes are very glossy, almost like he's emotional. And this scene baffles me, and I'd like to hear what you think in the comments section down below. Because first of all, the voice that says open your eyes sounds to me like Elsie.
Open your eyes.
She could be bringing him back online after his brain module was put back in him after the cradle. And he's emotional because of the experience he had with Ford. But the most interesting thing is what is in his eyes. You see seemingly a person with a white dress shirt. And I think this is Charlotte. And I think we could potentially be seeing two different scenes. Elsie telling Bernard to open his eyes from the cradle, and Charlotte telling Bernard to bring himself back online in the present. The reason why I think these are two separate scenes is because the voice that says open your eyes seems to be Elsie and Bernard. And that to me could represent that whatever Bernard experienced in the cradle could have been a sense of suffering, because it resulted in him hearing his own voice. And that means that Bernard is just on the cusp of consciousness. And that's what happened with Dolores. She kept hearing Arnold's voice until his voice eventually turned into Dolores' voice, her own voice. And I think the same could be said with Bernard. But this scene with Charlotte could be a whole other thing. When we saw Bernard return to the Mesa and Charlotte saw him, I called her out and said that she isn't acting normal. She knows that Bernard is a host. And it turns out that she does, because she takes Bernard to this room and she confronts him about him being a host. She shows Bernard all of these models of himself. And this is where Charlotte could ask one of them to bring themselves back online so Bernard could see the type of build that Bernard is. Hence why in the eyes we can see a Charlotte type figure. But thank you so much, everybody. If you have any theories or predictions for episode 7, please leave a comment down below. I'm sorry if this video seems very jumbled up. I am literally moving out of my house as we speak. So expect great quality Westworld videos covering episode 7. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.